I want to say just like a minute or two about Tom's background for anybody who doesn't know, and then I'll let Joe and Tom take it away for a little bit. But for those of you who don't know the history behind, where Tom has been, I think I started reading Tom Philpott's work back in the mid 2000s. I won't say exactly for sure when that was, when Tom was at Grist, and then watched his work as he moved as a major contributor to Mother Jones. I think Tom has a unique perspective on food and agriculture writing, particularly because he's got experience doing what many of us, do, both work on a farm, try to figure out how to be profitable on a farm, and understand the sort of crushing weight of the sort of multinational agribusiness complex when you're trying to make it as an independent family farmer. And so I think he brings that uniqueness to his writing and that perspective that unfortunately many other journalists just don't have that perspective. And so I'm just really grateful for the work that Tom has done and helping educate people about sort of the plight of family farmers and the history of the food industry. So with that, Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you sort of have a conversation with Tom about the work he's been doing and his most recent book.
Yeah, thank you. I have my copy here, so
All right.
put the book up, and I read it almost immediately when it came out, and I should have probably reread it as Barbara. Now Barbara will show me up soon here because she just finished the book today. But what I would highly recommend it. I think Angela and I talked a little bit though. Be prepared. What I would say is be prepared. I know we all come to this platform because we have a desire and a passion to bring about social justice within the food system and a healthy food system. But this book is really startling and can kind of drive you to think, oh my gosh, it's really that bad. And I've been doing this kind of like Barbara 40 years. And the way it's put together, the facts, the way it weaves it all together, really causes you to take note. Angela and I talked today, and she said, I have a hard time with that book because I do this work every day, and then I read this book and I think, oh my God, so that's kind of our critique is be prepared. Be prepared. It's Perilous Bounty, the looming collapse of American farming and how we can prevent it. And Tom, it's great for you to join us. We can't thank you enough for all the work that you do out there, but also just your kindness for being here today. So.
Oh, I mean, Joe, when you came to me with this idea, I accepted immediately because like Mike and other folks on this call, Carrie mentioned it too, I follow you guys where you go. So if you guys, whatever organization you're with, you guys are one of my most prized sources. I've had many long conversations with you and also with Jake explaining things to me. And so I'm just really honored because I think this group and what you were doing before at OCM and other things you're doing in your career, some of the most important work happening in this space. And so just in sort of documenting the sort of ravages of corporate power in the space, and also at the same time keeping it's really consistent. These aren't contradictory things, but keeping social justice at the core of your critique of things, I think is really, really important. And so I wouldn't have missed this meeting for anything. And I also want to say that, like Nancy, I'm in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. That's where I come to you from. And like Nancy, I've worked in California since 2011 because that's where Mother Jones is based. And so I've been doing the Zoom thing or avoiding the Zoom thing for much longer than most people have in this pandemic. But but yeah, I mean, I just think, you know, the level of conversation you can have with a group like this is just incredible. So I'll let you take it away, Joe. What do you want to
Hey, well,
talk about?
well, one we talked about, we just, as Jake said, just a conversation. I think what's important, as much for talking about and highlighting facts in the book, is, you know, just who you are, what brought you when I got an announcement, I don't know, through one of your probably publishers or whatever, I'm sure my email got out there, and saw that this book was coming. My first thought was, well, what brought Tom to this point personally? I care probably more personally, and also though professionally, to the point you said, hey, I've got to write this book. I would think one would have to have a passion about writing a book, because that can't be an easy task.
No.
So what brought that about, or why now? What brought you to that point?
Well, you know, it's true that that I haven't, as an adult, chosen the most remunerative activities. You know, I've been a journalist. I tried my hand at farming for a while, and now book writing as a third activity. These aren't things that that end up paying you lots and lots of money. Yeah. So what drove me to do it? It certainly wasn't money, Joe. This isn't ending up on any bestsellers lists. But you know, as Jake was mentioning, you know, I've been at this topic since about the mid 2000s. I think I started farming in Western North Carolina, about an hour west of where I am now, in 2004. And I had been a journalist before that, and very quickly I decided I needed to, you know, I was sort of immersed in farming. We had a small CSA farm. We also did farm dinners in our area. And plunging into that, I could see really quickly just, you know, all of the pressures of trying to grow, you know, decent food and make a decent living as a farmer and treat people well in a system of this hyper consolidation. And you feel it, you know, like in our area, the biggest, you know, grocery chain by far was Walmart. There's a giant Walmart in our county, and that's where most people bought their food. And so if you're trying to do decent food in a situation like that, you're competing against this giant machine for sucking, you know, the cheapest possible stuff, from, you know, tools and widgets to pork chops, from as far away as, you know, as needs be, as long as the price is cheap. And so I quickly, you know, and I had been a financial journalist, and so I just started writing about corporations and their influence over the food system and agriculture from the perspective of someone on a small farm. And so I did that work. You know, I ended up transitioning off the farm over some, you know, basically like family land tenure issues. This is my girlfriend's family land, and getting deeper and deeper into writing about food and ag for Grist, and then for Mother Jones, and I got it with the constant pressure of deadlines and having to produce, you know, mostly 400, 500, 600, 800 word pieces. I did get the urge to dig into the topic and really get deep into it. And so I had on my mind for a while, like, okay, what book am I going to write? Like, how am I going to, you know, dive in deeper into this topic and not have an editor, you know, behind my back saying, is it ready yet? Is it ready yet? And so in that time, you know, as sort of a national food and ag correspondent, you end up getting pulled into two areas because they're the two, you know, major areas of food production in the US, and that is California, and essentially a few agricultural valleys in California, including one enormous one called the Central Valley, and the Corn Belt of Iowa. These are the places where the most concentration of food production happens, and so I spent a lot of time in both those places over the years, And I started to notice as one will spending time in there that they both have serious ecological problems based on the way they're being farmed. And I thought, wow, I wonder if most Americans realize this, and I wonder if they understand the implications of it. This is something that is so effortless. You go to the Walmart or McDonald's and get lots and lots of food for cheap. They've come to rely on it, but do they know how tenuous it is and how increasingly tenuous it is? And so that was sort of the germ of the book. And you're on mute, Joe.
Yes, I am. I said, of course I am. I'm always doing that.
Okay, me too.
Sorry. The yeah, one of the things you've mentioned, the California and the Midwest, and in the book, that's really what you talk about. You've highlighted those two regions. But the one thing I want to ask you, I noticed in the book one place, and a lot of farmers on the call, and some are not, but one thing I really appreciated. You have a section in there. I didn't go back to five. I was going to go back in the book and say on page such and such, but I didn't do that. But you talk about that you were farming in North Carolina, as you've mentioned here, and you knew when you were about half done with picking or cutting the lettuce because
Yes.
your fingers were so frozen they'd become numb. And well, then you said, and I knew therefore I was about half done for the day.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more, just so we kind of understand that background. I mean, that's truly farming, paying those sacrifices.
Yeah. So this is a farm that specialized in salad greens, and and a wide variety of them. Sort of all different kinds of lettuces, but arugula, baby kale, baby chard, and we would grow that stuff mature too. But our salad mix was our main thing. Probably had like 10 or 12 different varieties in a typical mix. And it's also a place, it's in North Carolina, but it's up in the mountains at about 2,800 feet. And so it's pretty cool summers. And in the seasons, compared to like Austin, where I grew up, or eastern part of North Carolina, very, very cool. And it's also very wet. It's essentially a temperate rainforest up there. And so cold and wet and salad and cutting salad greens it's beautiful. You're in these fields of strips of these different greens, and there's mountains behind you and mist coming in, but it can be really, really cold. And of course I had those gloves that leave your fingers open, but still you just be down there cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting. And yeah, it was the joke that we had was, the harvest was over when it's like when your cold fingers you lost all feeling in your fingers, you're about halfway through that harvest. Then of course you had to go wash them and pack them. But yeah, that was like that. We grew a whole bunch of different stuff. We were a diversified farm, but that was the sort of bread and butter of what we were known for. So I spent many, many hours in those fields.
Yeah, I being a farmer, I really picked up on that you added that to the book. I found throughout the book that I really enjoyed it because while it is intense, as what I told you, Angela and I was talking about, you also splatter it with some pretty amazing facts, stories, personal reflections of yourself. And I thought that really lifted the value of the book and kind of helped the reader, as myself, to better understand you and perhaps where you were coming from on that. The other issue in the book, you talk about a time where you had this opportunity to go to, I can't remember the word you used, but you went to the headquarters of Monsanto.
Yes, I did.
And I think that was an interesting perspective within the book. Can you kind of share that with everybody? One, I can't believe they let you in, but go ahead. It's your story.
Yeah, I went into the heart of the beast. And so I should just say that that I think I mentioned this in the book, that I kind of got my break as a food politics writer from Monsanto. And how that happened was, when I first started writing about this stuff, I had a personal blog that was free to anyone to read. I wasn't getting paid for it. And my girlfriend was thrilled about that, all the time I was spending on that, as you can imagine, because we were making so much money on farming. Of course, I had time to have a hobby blog. So I had this blog, and I was doing stuff. I look back on it; it's very much like what I do today, just analysis of these various things happening in industrial agriculture. And I was right. This is in 2004, and I was writing a lot about Monsanto as they were sort of tightening their grip over the seed and pesticide market, and going gung ho with their Roundup Ready crops. And I would write the blog more or less daily, and I had this Friday feature that was a roundup of the weeks of news that I didn't get to for a full post, and I called it Roundup Ready. And so it came out every Friday. And one fine day, I got a cease and desist letter from Monsanto telling me that if I didn't stop using that phrase, they were going to sue me. And I put it down. And I was like, I've made my name for myself. This is it. I'm gonna, I don't know where it's gonna take me, but I'm not. At the time, I literally had 30 readers. You could tell on your blog. There was like a tracker on the blogging software, and you could tell where the readers were. And I did start to see a point when all of a sudden I could see the domain names of like ADM and Monsanto coming through. So I was like, wow, these people are reading me. And they had some assistant doing a Google search probably. And, what are people saying about us? And so I got this cease and desist letter. Of course, I just printed it on my blog and wrote a smart ass response. And that's how I ended up getting noticed by Grist and was able to take myself over to Grist. And then, over the years, I had a fairly hostile relationship with Monsanto, and I would, talk to, contact them for comment on some story. They would be very tight-lipped. They didn't want to have much to do with me. And then I think what the mystery of why they let me in was because they basically by the mid 2010s were so unpopular and getting so controversial that they decided to change their tune and just sort of embrace everyone. And this is when they invited in Bill Nye, the science guy, and basically anyone. They were just reaching out to everyone and trying to make friends with everyone. And so I got an email from Rob Fraley, who's like he was a chief technology officer, very high executive, one of the innovators in sort of genetic technology, early employee of the agricultural formation of Monsanto. And he invited me in for a meeting, and I spent an entire day there, getting the spiel and sort of walking around and seeing all the different departments, and it was absolutely unforgettable. And I just want to see, does Barbara have a question? I see a hand up.
She may have.
If I can get myself unmuted. Well, actually, more of a comment, but the most striking chapter in your book for me, because I've followed this stuff along for a very long time. So I've known about soil loss. I've known about what concentrated agriculture is doing to our soil and our water in the Midwest. But in chapter 2, it's entitled The Flood Next Time. And I was startled by the data and the information you have in that chapter about what is almost inevitable with climate change and global warming to happen in California, and what is at stake of being lost in terms of livestock, cattle, crops, humans. It was just a most remarkable chapter. So maybe you could say a little bit more about that. That the research to uncover all that was remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, that is the chapter that terrifies me. It's something that while I was researching it, I was able to sort of make it this kind of intellectual project to document this stuff, and while I was researching it and writing it, I sort of knew, hey, this is good material for the book. This is incredible. This needs to get out more. But I really didn't think much about it was like this sort of this thing that could happen that was pretty abstract, I should say. But since I've written it, and since the book has come out, I find it bone chilling. And just so what I do in that chapter is I talk about how California, it's, the big problem haunting its agriculture and the Central Valley that we all know about is water scarcity, and the increasingly brutal droughts that the state has had, and the drawdown of the aquifer that's ongoing. But we frame it and think about it in terms of water scarcity. But it turns out that there is a flip side, a mirror image, a different side of the same coin, also driven by climate change, that for scientific reasons that I lay out in the book, we're also going to see increasingly fierce winter storms in California. And it turns out that the winter storms that we're talking about are on a scale that is really hard for us to get our heads around. But the early American settlers who came into California and sort of populated it as a state after it became a US state in the 1850s, they got a very non-abstract dose of what it could look like. So there was this flood, there was this storm that started in December 1861 after a lot of snowpack had hit the Sierra Nevadas, and it didn't stop for something like 6 weeks. It just rained nonstop. And what happened was the entire Central Valley, so, Central Valley goes from not very far north of LA, in the middle of the state, all the way up to almost the Oregon border. It is a massive valley. I think it's 320 miles long, and between 40 and 60 miles wide. And the entire thing in this flood and storm was under 20 feet of water. And it was this absolute, just complete shock to the early state. People didn't know if it was ever going to recover. Obviously, it quickly recovered, and this flood receded into sort of good old American historical amnesia. If you talk to people that grew up in California, they've never heard of it. It's pretty little known. And so what climate scientists have found, what paleoclimatologists, to go back and look at the climate record, have found is that that area has had 5 storms bigger than that in the past 1,000 years. So this is something that happens every 100 to 200 years. And climate scientists look at that record and look at sort of climate models. And what this incredible scientist from UCLA named Daniel Swain has come up with is that the probability of another storm like on that magnitude coming again is it's more than 50-50 in the next 20 years. Because of climate change and because of this tendency for it to happen. And there's all sorts of technical stuff in the book about how weather starts deep in the South Pacific and how climate change is sort of speeding that up. But it's a very real possibility. And if you compare the Central Valley of today with the Central Valley of 1862, it is, this is where, to me, it gets terrifying. And, I've got a lot of family and friends in Austin who just lived through that situation of that crazy ice and snowstorm that happened down there. Loads and loads of people losing electricity for extended periods, people losing water for extended periods. And that really drove home to me what it's going to be like, because the Central Valley was very sparsely populated at that time. There were Native American tribes, and there's historical documents showing that they tended to clear out. Like, they had oral traditions and and knowledge that when they saw this coming, they headed for the hills. They got to higher ground. And the settlers didn't know what the hell was going on and figured it's got to start raining at some point. So a lot of them died, and most of the and we don't really know how many, but there weren't a whole lot of settlements in the Central Valley, but there was a substantial amount of cattle farming, and that's what the area, what agriculture there was cattle, and it was 100% wiped out. And the storm basically wiped out the landowners who were Mexican. They had been Mexicans, and they became American citizens with California becoming a U.S. state. And there were white settlers who were eyeballing that land, going, we could be growing food and beef for the population centers at the coast. And the Mexican cattle ranchers were mainly growing it for leather, but we're starting to shift in that direction. And the storm comes and it basically just wiped them out, and they sold their land for pennies on the dollar, and basically to white settlers. And that's basically what rearranged California agriculture. And they didn't restock it. It was too expensive. They put in wheat and set about the whole drama of figuring out how to harness the water situation there. But you fast forward to today, and 3 of the 4 fastest growing cities are in the Central Valley. The population's in the tens of millions. You got Fresno and Stockton and Bakersfield. And so you've got the logistics of moving all these people out. You've also got a massive concentrated dairy industry, and you're talking about giant factory feedlot dairy operations with dairy cows. Mike can probably speak to this, but dairy cows are huge. Like modern bred dairy cows are enormous creatures, and there are more now than there were then. And the logistics of moving them to higher, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's in the hundreds of thousands. The logistics of moving them to higher ground is daunting. And then it's at the center of the US food system. And so you're talking about untold numbers of lost crops. And because of all the agriculture that goes on there, think of all the agrochemicals, the fertilizers, the pesticides. What happens to them? Do they escape into the water? Do they seep into the soil? And then you've also got something I didn't really know so much about until I reported the book out, is the Southern Central Valley is a enormous oil producer. They produce more oil there than they do in Louisiana. And all of it, the great bulk of it is concentrated in the Southern Central Valley. So now you've got all these petrochemical plants underwater. And then you think about just how modern life, like if you're not used to electricity, you're probably a little bit more resilient to a storm like that because you don't lose power because you never had power. And we know what happens when you lose power now. People die, people in nursing homes. And so, one of my favorite writers is this guy named Mike Davis, and he has a book that came out about 10 years ago about the possibility of bird flu. I think it may come out a little bit more than that ago. And Mike Davis says that book, the possibility of bird flu jumping into the human population, which is a real possibility, he's written like 20 books, and that's the one that scares him, and he had to banish it from his house. And I literally have at times thought of taking a razor blade and just like taking that chapter out of my book because it's so terrifying. And honestly, I don't know what the answer is to that. Yeah, because when Mother Jones ran an excerpt from it, my editors pressured me like, is California prepared? Are they doing enough to prepare? And my response is no. And they probably could be doing more to prepare, but I don't know how you prepare for something like that. These are metropolises of millions of people that could go under 20 to 30 feet of water. So, I don't know how much preparation there is to be done. And so, I think that chapter, Joe, strikes at the heart of this book is almost too scary to read.
Well, Angela and I didn't want to use the word scary. We chose the word intense.
Okay.
And is hit upon one of the chapters that will cause, I advise you to get this book. I think everyone will agree it's at least intense. We probably have time for one more question. Does anybody else have a question? Tom?
Hey, Tom, this is Gene up in New Hampshire. I bought and read your book this past winter. Thanks for writing it.
Thanks for buying it and reading it.
Yeah, and it prompted a lot of some of the actions I've been taking up here with some of the groups I've been affiliated with. But I'm a farmer and my season's ramping up, so I won't have much time to do anything but eat, sleep, and farm. But I did take away from your book the urgency of our, fragile food system here in the United States. And one of my thoughts was, every region that can grow food to the utmost of their ability should, in preparation for what's to come. And so some of my work up here with NOFA, Northeast Organic Farming Association, has been centered around trying to build more resilient food systems regionally. So what would you suggest, knowing what you know and writing what you have about, these upcoming issues, and climate change marches on. But what would you suggest each region of the country do to become more self-sufficient and food resilient?
Great question. And I think that, I think when I first started writing about this stuff in the mid 2000s, the idea around local and regionalization was about mitigating climate change. And the idea was, food miles, the average apple travels 1,000 miles or whatever the stat was. And then it turns out that we do burn a substantial amount of fossil fuels in transportation, but it's so the logistics are so sort of down pat. These companies have it so down pat that they actually do it pretty efficiently. And so food miles isn't the reason to relocalize. I think my book gets at, the first 3 chapters of my book about California get at what the real reason for relocalization is: climate mitigation, because we can't rely on California to keep churning at it at its present level because of various climate insults coming its way. And we can't rely on imports. That's what I anticipated getting a lot from industry was, well, we can just import our way out of this problem. But if you look at the import regions, the regions where we get a lot of food from, they have very, very similar problems around water. I mean, it's basically industrial fruit and vegetable production happens in Mediterranean climates. And Mediterranean climates are water constrained. And that's just all there is to it. And so for all their advantages, we have to, do exactly what you're doing in New Hampshire and have these redundant alternative systems that keep us resilient when these shocks happen. And I think that to answer your question, which I think is very, very crucial, I think it ends up like what, you just said exactly something like I feel in my bones. Like when the season ramps up, you are eating, sleeping, and farming. That's what you're doing. And that's what everyone who farms the kind of way that you do is doing. And so it's enough work for you to keep your farm going. You can't also solve this problem. And so
Right.
I think what it takes is coalitions, community, working together with other people, getting other people interested. And I think it ends up being a policy problem. I think it ends up, people have been talking about food policy councils for a long time at the local level. They've been tried. I don't know how effective they've been, but the idea is there. And the idea is getting together at the whatever level, going up from municipal to regional levels, and figuring out what are the assets. You're up in New England. What assets does New England have as a food production a food production center? And what are the challenges? Well, obviously one of the challenges is cold winter, long cold winter. Well, let's invest in season extension, infrastructure. You got Elliott Coleman up there, so people know how to do it. But let's make those investments. things that I saw as a farmer was the farmer's market model is really difficult because it's taking a day out of your week. You know, you're
Yeah.
doing your own hauling, you're going down there, you're being your own retailer.
Yep.
And everyone at the market, because of the seasonal nature of things, you know, you got this beautiful tomato crop, well, everyone else has got tomatoes too. And that, you know, it's great, but it also puts some, you know, it puts you in sort of competition with folks. And so I'm always thinking about, and I have seen examples of this, things like farmer cooperative owned retail, you know, stuff like that. And so that way, instead of you hauling yourself and your food to the farmer's market on Saturday, your mate farmers are bringing it to one central retail spot. And so instead of, you know, you being the retailer, and this is where the economics get rough, but, you know, maybe it can work. You hire a store manager and you have employees and they take care of that marketing, and all you're doing is figuring out how to get it there. And, you know, that's just one, I think, example of the sort of food hub idea. It's an example of, I think, of a food hub. But this is like, so you're, you know, it would be a model, you know, kind of like something like Organic Valley, where the co-op is buying your food and then selling it at a retail markup, and you're involved, you're cut into that retail markup. And maybe you guys sell other stuff. You know, maybe the co-op sells toothpaste, but you're as a farmer owner, you're cut into those toothpaste sales too. I think that's one way to think about it. But it's certainly one thing I do know from having my hands in the dirt and, you know, getting up at 5 a.m. on Saturday to go to the farmer's market after, you know, harvesting the nut, you know, all day the day before, is the farmers themselves it can't hang on the individual farmer. It is a community problem. It is a municipal problem. It's a regional problem. And that is what, you know, when you write a book, like you ask yourself, like, what is my hope for this? How do I hope that it's read? Now, I hope it advances the conversation that this is a public problem that we all have a stake in. And, you know, buy local, buy regional isn't some feel-good slogan. And it's not, no one's making a claim that it's going to prevent climate change, but it's about communities being resilient through the shocks that are coming, that are already here, but are coming fast and furious.
Thanks,
I mean,
Tom.
you know, just like Texas lost. I read somewhere that Texas lost 90% of its citrus crop.
Yeah. Texas got battered, and that's part of our for-profit predatory capitalist system. But I won't go there. I understand what you're saying. I found some hope recently in the fact that people, just people, recognized the value of local foods once they saw empty shelves at their grocery stores starting with COVID last year. The CSA movement is continuing strong this year, I can report. Where I find the most difficulty is in the policy front. I think convincing these, mostly some of these bought off politicians to actually adopt some of the good practices going forward and develop more farms locally and everything is the biggest challenge.
No doubt.
So I think the consumers are starting to wake up slowly, maybe a little bit more, definitely more faster than the politicians. So
I think that is a great sort of segue to the end of our conversation. And I just want to say thanks to Joe and Tom for a great, and thank you, Tom, for being here. And we hope that we won't abuse your time, but we hope you'll come back in the future as well, because I think, as you can tell, there's a lot more of this conversation that this group wants to have.
Anytime. And I just want to just jump in and say that I can't, you know, I think that is a great place to end the conversation. And I don't know of a group doing more to try to change the conversation at the political level than FFA. So thank you on that front.